I lied about being faithful till the end. My ex saw the text and said never contact him again. Looking back on everything that's happened and the way that it happened in the last few years, I'm not sure what to believe anymore. I don't know if I did the right thing. Well, I'm alone now and I've lost more than I thought I would, so I guess I do know that I didn't do the right thing. It doesn't change anything and it doesn't matter now. It's all gone to shit anyway. A few months ago, me and my boyfriend Paxton broke up. The breakup happened for a few reasons. We weren't always perfect together, but it ultimately came down to trust. Our relationship was good for the most part, but there were some parts that we struggled with, and at the time of the breakup, we had gotten to the point where we were fighting and arguing over everything. We loved each other, but we couldn't be around each other, so we decided to separate. It was mostly mutual, and it was done for the good of both of us. It was kind of like an indefinite split, and Pax thought he was making the best possible decision given the situation, but he didn't have all the information. He didn't know that I was the reason we were struggling so much. I was the reason we were constantly at each other's throats. I was keeping way too many secrets, and it ended up ruining us. When Pax and I met, I wasn't in the mood or the position to date. I had just broken up with someone else, and my life was pretty unstable. I wasn't working a good job, and I was doing all I could to move out of the apartment that I hated. The last thing that I needed was another boyfriend, but I don't know. I guess he kind of took me by surprise. Back then, I mostly gravitated towards more reckless, free spirit types when it came to the men that I dated. I was all about being with people who you had a lot in common with. I thought it was best to only date people who matched your vibe and your place in life. But Pax was the complete opposite of me. For starters, he was an engineer where I was an artist. A sculptor, to be more specific. I'm pretty sure we met when he came into the studio I shared with a few other artists. He was looking to make a custom vase for his mother's birthday, and he liked a few of my pieces that were on display. When we started talking, it was as strictly professional as it could get. It wasn't like I didn't find him attractive, he just wasn't my type at all. And I was in desperate need of a commission, so I didn't want to let anything mess that up. But then, one night on the phone, we were discussing different designs, and the conversation kind of shifted to other things. He started speaking like an actual person, not all robotic and weird. He even laughed at some point, and I guess that helped me see a different side of him. After the commission was done and I got paid, I was kind of tempted to explore things a bit more. Step out of my usual routine. He was different, and in the beginning that put me off, but later on it started to interest me. I was curious what dating him would be like, so I decided to pursue it. And it helped that I could tell he was already interested in me. He couldn't really hide it. It was actually kind of adorable. When we first started dating, it hadn't really been serious for me. I should have told him that because I could tell that it was for him, but I didn't. Like I said, I wasn't in the right place for a new relationship. I just wanted to have fun, try out something new, and I thought Pax would be the perfect way to do that. I never expected to actually develop feelings for him. That took me completely by surprise. Not in an entirely bad way, though. It definitely wasn't what I was looking for at the time, but it was nice. He was a great guy and an amazing boyfriend. It wasn't until him that I realized there could actually be benefits to having such a type A, straight-laced partner. It was like I could just turn my brain off whenever I was around him because I knew that he would get everything done. We were together for a few years. He was my first actual long-term boyfriend. He cared about me and looked after me in ways that I couldn't or when I fell short. He had what my parents called a more serious job, and so I hardly, if ever, had to worry about bills when we were together. He was just the type to take care of everything. I enjoyed our time together. I really did. And I cared about him, more than I expected to even, but after a few years of just Pax, I was kind of over it. I really wish I had some serious emotional reason for why I decided to do it. I wish I had something to say, some excuse that would make me seem like less of an asshole, but I don't. The honest truth of it is that I wanted something more. More excitement, better sex, even more interesting connections, things I couldn't just go out and find since I was with Pax. But I also couldn't leave him. I was in a very weird situation. I liked him, I liked what we had, and more especially, I liked what he'd done for me. Not just financially, though, but emotionally. I mean, was I grateful that he paid the rent on the studio and my apartment for a few months whenever I was having issues? Sure, but I was grateful for other stuff too. He called me every morning and every night. He sent me texts and constantly checked up on me. He reminded me of important dates because he had them marked in his calendar. He even called to check up on my parents. I wanted something different, but I also didn't want to lose that. The dating scene is only getting worse, and I didn't want to have to start from scratch if I left him. I didn't want the exhaustion of having to weed through shitty men for one that was just slightly less awful than the rest when I had a great man already. But my restlessness got the better of me, and I made a couple of bad decisions. It started with a late night at the studio. I was working on a piece with this other sculptor, Garrett, and it was taking way more time to finish than we'd thought it would. In my time at the studio, I'd seen a lot of artists pass through. Some rent a space there for just a few weeks or a few months, but Garrett, like me, had been there for years. And in that time, we'd never actually developed a friendship. We were friendly with each other, and I did consider him my friend, but we just weren't close. That night, though, in the process of trying to finish, something changed. We were both tired and trying to fight off sleep with some of the alcohol that he had stashed away. It wasn't a good idea by any means, but we were trying all that we could. We were also just talking about random things so we wouldn't get too bored. It was a lot of molding and setting, and that tended to get tedious after a few hours. He told me about a few of his more insane client requests and equally bizarre clients, and I did the same. We traded stories and kind of bonded in a weird way. I told him about how I'd met Pax, and about how he'd come into the studio for a commission. I made some joke about how I couldn't trust his taste, and how surprised I was that he still wanted to be with me after seeing me wearing dirty overalls and covered in clay. And then Garrett said that it wasn't surprising to him since I looked beautiful, no matter what I was wearing. That made me blush more than it should have. I'd been called beautiful before, and there was nothing special about the way he said it or anything, but I just couldn't really get it out of my head. By the end of the night, I wasn't sure what exactly it was, but I knew that something was different between us. And over the next few days, as we kept working together, and I kept catching him staring or smiling at me when he thought I wasn't looking, I could tell that he could feel it too. We didn't do anything about it, though. Not for a long while. But then one night, I needed some space from Pax. He was being overbearing and clingy like he usually was, and I just couldn't handle it. So I lied and told him that I had left something at the studio and needed to pick it up. Really, I was just hoping for some alone time and maybe a chance to pick up on some more work, since being away from Pax gave me some free time. But I was surprised to find that Garrett was already at the studio working on something. We worked quietly beside each other for a bit before we both caved and found ourselves getting drunk together on the floor, laughing about stupid shit I can't even remember right now. At some point, the laughter died down, and the air between us shifted. We were sitting on the floor, backs against one of the work tables, and it felt like the silence was way too loud all of a sudden. Before I knew it, we were leaning in closer. It wasn't some dramatic, crazy thing. It was just easy. The kiss started soft, but then I kissed him back, and it deepened. And then one thing blurred into the next, and suddenly we weren't just kissing. We were pulling each other closer and taking our clothes off. I had thought and hoped that we'd just fool around, but it ended up being more than that. Before I even had the chance to think about Pax, we'd crossed that line, and we had sex right there in the studio. The days that followed didn't slow anything down. If anything, it only pulled us closer together. I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway. The two of us, over the weeks that passed, kind of fell into this strange rhythm where we'd both spend nights at the studio pretending to do work. It never extended beyond that, though. We never met up outside the studio or anything. I knew it was wrong every single time, but I didn't care. Being with Garrett was intoxicating. It wasn't just the sex, though that was good enough to make me forget myself. It was also kind of the way he looked at me and the fact that we were so similar. I don't know. I guess he made me feel special for whatever reason, and it felt like we really understood each other. I started separating my life into two messy parts without even realizing it. With Pax, I was the girlfriend he wanted me to be. But with Garrett, I was someone else entirely. I could be both sides of myself with two people who treated me well, and it sounds awful to say, but I lived for those moments, slipping between those two versions of myself like it was nothing. Things with Pax stayed the same even as things with Garrett got more intense. I knew I was betraying him, but in my head it was like I'd created two different worlds, and as long as I kept them separate, I could keep them both. But, like everything else, the shine eventually wore off. After a few weeks, the thrill that had lit everything up started to fade between Garrett and I. We could both feel it. The conversations were still easy, but the nights weren't as interesting. What we had run its course, we both knew. There was no reason to say it out loud, we both knew. So we called it quits, simple as that. You'd think that would have been my wake-up call, my sign that I should go back to PAX, try to fix what I'd broken, but instead, it just made me feel like the box was already open, and there was no point in trying to close it again. So I get even more reckless. I started dipping back into the club scene, just here and there at first, and then more often. Drinks, music, strangers. It didn't take long before I started slipping further. One weekend, I met a guy at the bar who was visiting town for some conference. He was charming in an effortless, almost unintentional way. We talked about nothing important, just the music and how overpriced the drinks were. But before I knew it, I was leaving with him. I don't know why I did it. I think maybe I was just craving what I had with Garrett that first time. A few hours of feeling like a different version of myself. That should have been it, but unfortunately there were others. Sometimes it was just flirting and making out in clubs. Other times it was full-night strangers. One guy was a DJ at a club I went to with friends. Another was a painter I met through Garrett, someone I'd seen around the studio before but never really spoken to. That one lingered for a bit. We ended up hooking up more than once. Not every night was memorable. Some of it was kind of a blur of faces I don't think I could recognize now, and names I don't remember. Each time I told myself I'd stop, that this would be the last night or the last slip-up. I kept telling myself that it had to end soon because I couldn't possibly keep up with the lies. But the truth was, it became this toxic cycle I didn't know how to handle anymore. Pax stayed clueless and supportive through it all, and that eventually helped the guilt creep in. He was still there for me, even while I was out doing everything but being faithful. But the guilt never outweighed the rush and the excitement of doing something I shouldn't have been. And that's how it went for months, at least until Paxton started to notice that something wasn't right. Honestly, it was only a matter of time. He wasn't dumb. The late nights were starting to pile up, and I could only come up with so many excuses. Sometimes I came home distant and distracted, like my body was there, but my mind was still somewhere else. At first, he would make these small comments like, "Oh, you've been busy a lot lately," or, "Yeah, you seem a little far away tonight." But soon, the questions started to get more serious. He wanted to know where I'd been, who I'd been with, why I was always tired, or why I never wanted to stay in like we used to. I denied it every single time. Over and over again, I told him nothing was going on, that I was just tired. I would lie and say that I was stressed because of projects at the studio and family stuff. The lies worked, or at least enough to keep him guessing. Still, I could see what it was doing to him. He grew restless and paranoid. He started peeking at my phone when I was using it or trying to check it when I put it down. He'd ask me the same questions in different ways, like he was trying to confuse me into slipping up. It made him jumpy, and it made me feel like the worst person alive. But I kept quiet because I knew what was at stake if the truth ever came out. It all reached a breaking point a few months ago. Pax sat me down one night and he said he couldn't take it anymore, that the doubts and the way his mind was eating him alive was too much. He told me he didn't want to be this person, the jealous, crazy boyfriend who was always checking on me and waiting for something to go wrong. And then he suggested that maybe we should separate for a while, that he needed time to work on himself, to sort through his trust issues. He even apologized to me. He said I didn't deserve to live with someone who was always accusing me, always doubting me. He put it all on himself, and I let him. I sat there and let him take all the blame for everything I had done. That was what kind of showed me that I was a horrible person. I watched him as he broke down, saying he wasn't sure he was enough for me or the right guy. I kept my mouth shut. I didn't confess. I told myself there was no point in telling him the truth. So I told him I understood and let the breakup happen. A part of me clung to the fact that he'd called it a break. I had hoped that maybe, if I gave him space, we could find our way back to each other. About 2 months after the breakup, I got my wish. He sent me a text that said, "Want to get coffee?" It honestly felt a little too good to be true, that he had come back to me so soon and with no knowledge of what I'd done, but I didn't waste any time thinking about it too much, so I said yes. We met at this little cafe not far from the studio, and it was like nothing had changed, like no time had passed. It was like those first few months of us being together. I don't think I'd realized how much I missed him until that moment, sitting across from him with some coffee between us, watching him smile at me. I know it sounds ungrateful and maybe slightly unhinged, but those 2 months apart made me realize just how much I loved Pax. I wanted to be with him more than anything. After that, we saw each other more and more, coffee, dinners, and weekends together, just like when we'd first started dating. Eventually, we started spending the night at each other's places again. I had to move out of his place after the breakup, so we spent majority of our time together at my new apartment. None of it felt rushed or awkward or like we were clinging on to something that was already dead. This time it felt intentional, like we were both choosing each step to take together. Slowly, we rebuilt what we'd lost. He started coming by the studio after work just to check in. Sometimes he'd even stay with me while I worked. And when we were alone, he was softer, calmer. The tension that had poisoned us before was gone. There were no accusations or arguments. It was just peaceful and loving, like it should have always been. We still disagreed from time to time like any other couple, but it wasn't constant fighting anymore. It felt like he had let go of some of the paranoia, and I, for once, wasn't giving him reasons to doubt me. I stuck to only him. I wasn't talking to anyone else. I was actually staying faithful and not just telling him that I was. I wasn't lying. I wasn't sneaking off. I wasn't covering my tracks. I'd finally realized just how much I loved him, and I was all in. Nothing else seemed more tempting than what I could have with Pax, so I stayed with him. I wanted the future we used to talk about, all of it. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could still have it. That somehow the mess I'd made could be covered up and forgotten. But I was wrong. A mistake like mine doesn't just disappear. I should have known that it would come back to bite. I shouldn't have gotten too comfortable, but I did. And eventually, it came back around to ruin the life I knew I didn't deserve but desperately wanted. It wasn't even one of my usual mistakes, which almost made it worse. Back when I was restless and looking for excitement, I stuck to my lane. I mostly hooked up with guys from the art scene, people at the clubs, the kind of men Paxton would never know or even cross paths with. But there was one time I crossed a line I shouldn't have. I slept with someone from Paxton's world, a mutual friend. It was stupid and careless, but maybe that was the point. At the time, that risk felt like the most exciting thing. That was exactly the kind of person I used to be before Pax came along to calm me down. We had something a few times, me and this mutual friend, and I had to end it because he couldn't handle it. He felt too guilty and disturbed by it. His bleeding heart for Paxton, despite them not even being that close, should have rung some alarm bells, but I was too overconfident. He was the last person I fooled around with before I had to break it off, because of Paxton's suspicions. And then eventually we broke up, so he just kind of faded into the background. I hadn't thought about him in months before he randomly called me. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I picked up and heard his voice, I was mostly confused. I couldn't understand why he was calling me, so I asked what the hell he wanted. He didn't waste any time. He said he felt sick about what we'd done and that back then he'd almost told Paxton. The only reason he hadn't was because Pax broke it off with me before he could, and he thought that his friend was in the clear. But now that we were back together, he said he couldn't sit back and watch his friend ruin his life over someone like me. He told me that he was giving me only a few days to tell Paxton the truth and come clean, or he would do it himself. It was completely ridiculous. There were barely even friends. I would have laughed if I wasn't panicking. I had no idea what to do or how to go about any of it. My mind spun in circles for hours. I thought about coming clean, about sitting Paxton down and telling him everything myself. But every time I imagined it, I realized that I just couldn't do it. If I did, I knew he would walk away, and I'd just gotten him back. I couldn't lose him again. Maybe I didn't deserve him, and I'd done some bad things. I didn't care. I loved him, and he loved me. That's all that should have mattered. So I decided to stay quiet. I convinced myself that it would be my word against his. If it came down to it, I'd deny everything, and Pax would believe me. He'd have to. What I didn't account for was the evidence. Screenshots, Old texts from months back that I didn't even think about. They were all incriminating and awful. There was no lie I could tell, no story I could spin. The night Paxton confronted me, I knew instantly that it was over. He sat me down, phone in his hand, and showed me everything that his friend had sent him. Message after message of us making plans to meet up, flirting, sneaking around behind his back. There was no way out. I tried to explain, but I didn't even know where to begin. I don't think there was anything I could have sent that would any of it better or make me look guilty. Nothing came. So instead I tried to tell him that that was the old me and that I'd changed, which I had, but he was barely even listening. He didn't shout or get angry. He looked heartbroken. He said the cheating was bad enough, but what really hurt him was the fact that I let him doubt himself for months. I let him spiral with doubt, let him think he was crazy, while I carried on lying. He said he could never forgive me for that it was the worst thing I'd done. After that, he stood up and told me to never contact him again. Before he walked out, he said that he wants nothing to do with me, and that whatever we had was over, just like that. Everything that I was trying to salvage and hold on to was gone. I tried to lie to myself, make myself feel better by saying that I wasn't in the wrong, that I'd tried my best to be different and he had still left, but now I know it's not true. I'm the only one at fault for all of it. I ruined the only thing that had ever felt solid and real in my life, and for what? A handful of nights I can barely even remember. I'm not sure what to even do with myself now. I could lose my spot at the studio in a few weeks. My commissions barely trickle in anymore, and even when I do get a client, the money isn't enough to cover both the studio and my apartment. I've started running the numbers in my head, and it's really not looking good for me. I could lose everything. And to top it all off, the love of my life never wants to see me again. The nights without him are the hardest. I lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over, wishing I could undo even just one decision, but I can't. I've messed it all up, and now I have no idea what comes next for me.